Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and hey, I don't sound as sick. Maybe a little nasally still, but a lot better. And now that I've had some time to one, not be horribly sick, and two, to actually read over the classes a bit, this is going to be my full opinion and review of the Commander playtest for the Battlecry playtest. Now, as a reminder for everyone, since many people, especially on the Reddit, seem to forget, these classes are not the final draft, as it were. There's going to be possibly some changes, though I feel like Commander's pretty solid, but there's no reason to get in such a tizzy. Just, participate in the playtest and let Paizo know your thoughts on the class. So, what are my thoughts on the class? Commander is a very interesting class that I think works a lot of the problems with how Paizo's been doing things a lot better than some previous classes. And what I mean by that is this class does the one thing with supports that I really prefer, which is it makes supports actually fun by letting them do things during their turn. Many of the commander's support abilities also allow the commander to take part, allowing you to use your actions to do damage along with having your team do damage. The commander is a support class in the fact that it compresses and it increases action efficiency throughout your entire team. Having a commander on your team is like having an additional party member, as the number of additional actions they can provide is unparalleled. And the commander can also get the best out of each player on your team by utilizing them to their fullest. If you enjoy being the big brain on the battlefield, and if you enjoy thinking your way through combats, the commander is going to be for you. So, looking at the core stats here, we have an intelligence-based class. I know a lot of people are not super into having more intelligence-based marshals, since there's so many already, and I personally would be fine if it went more wisdom, especially because there are certain routes in the commander line that could benefit from having increased wisdom stat, for instance. For instance, there's a medicine line in the commander stuff that lets you just be really good at using medicine, and having high wisdom would be really good for that. Now, having high intelligence is good, and that's why they've done it. Also, this particular class uses warfare lore a lot, which is something I really like. You can even see here in the train skills, you get both society and warfare lore +2 and your intelligence extra skills. Warfare lore is really cool. I always like it because it's always something that plays a part in some campaign at some point. Warfare lore is always a good lore to have in general, and having a class completely based on warfare lore is pretty cool. And they actually automatically progress through warfare lore, getting up to legendary at level 15, which is really fun. Honestly, it's a particular thing I really like to see. And as well, this is a full martial class. It can use all weapons pretty much except for advanced weapons, and it can use all armors. So that being the case, you can play your commander pretty much how you want, and because intelligence is its key stat, it doesn't really matter if you go heavy armor, light armor, whatever your thing is, you're going to be able to play your commander just fine. If they do change the wisdom, I think it'll be fine. They could just bump up the skills by 1, and I think that would work out pretty well. The only thing you'd have to change is how warfare lore works, but I mean, Thaumaturge already uses charisma for esoteric lore, so I don't feel like that would be that big of an issue. In addition to many of the other dual affinity kind of classes, the commander being both a martial and a support character, this class has 8+ con every level, which is pretty standard. I wouldn't expect it honestly to have more. And yeah, that's it for the base stats. So let's go ahead and look at what the commander actually gets. So the first and probably one of the most important features is Commander's Banner. Commander's Banner is essentially a 30-foot emanation around you all the time while you're wielding your banner. Now, the banner can be just a banner on a pole, or it can be attached to a weapon or shield of your choice. And so while you're wielding said weapon or shield, you get the effects of your banner. This is a great choice, and I absolutely love it because now you can use two-handed weapons much more easily, and it just allows for more different styles of play. I was very concerned this is going to be another Thaumaturge situation, or one of the many other classes that are single hand weapons only. So Commander's Banner is actually a pretty good feature, and it keeps the martial aspects of the commander without being too much of an issue. This aura that it produces, it doesn't have the aura trait, but the emanation gives a +1 status bonus to will saves against fear effects, which is also really cool. Though, if your banner is ever destroyed or stolen, everyone being affected by it within your 30 feet become frightened one. So it's something you do need to protect, and that's something that can be used against, or enemies can use against your team, which does add a level of caution when using this class, but it's a very powerful class, so I definitely think it's warranted. Oh, I was wrong. It does actually have the aura. It has the aura, commander, emotion, mental, and visual traits. And it also specifies in this part, if your banner is ever like somewhere else due to one of the other class features or feats you get, it always emanates from the banner itself, not from your character as a commander, which there's actually some very interesting things around that. But let's go ahead and talk about tactics. This is the number one thing. Now, people who've been watching Michael Sayer on Twitter noticed that he mentioned that this particular class is a prepared martial class. And what he meant by that was you get a number of tactics. Tactics essentially act like spells, but they're more like bonus feats that you can use that have they're all tactics and they work with your squad mates. Now you can have a number of squad mates equal to 2 plus your intelligence modifier, which means most parties starting out will be fully covered by a commander at level 1, which is pretty cool. Now, a squad mate in this are the ones who are capable of using your tactics. Now, your squad mates can only benefit from one of your tactics per round, so you must keep that in mind. In addition, many tactics require your team to use reactions. Now, the thing around the use of reactions, though, is they get this additional feature down here called drilled reactions, which means every time you use a tactic, which means per tactic, you can give one of your allies a bonus reaction that they can use only for the purpose of using that tactic. So classes like the fighter or the champion that have like really good reactions right out the gate don't need to worry about expending their valuable reactions. And actually the Guardian, which is a video we'll get to later, you can just use the reaction as necessary. And because this is per use of the tactic, that means there's oftentimes many ways you can provide additional actions to your entire team over the course of your turn. All really good. Now you start with a folio of 4 tactics, but you can only prepare 2. Now, whenever you increase, essentially, your class DC, you'll get access to another tactic you can use daily. So another folio you get to use every day. And you gain access to expert, master, and legendary tactics, which we'll go over in a little bit. Another interesting thing is you can actually change your tactics by spending 10 minutes to drill into your allies the new tactics. They actually don't even need to be present when you do so that's really cool as well. So you get essentially spells that you can swap out on a 10-minute rest. They don't use any focus points or anything like that, which means they actually can blend really well with focus points, as I feel like a lot of the tactics don't take up your entire turn, though you could do so if that was your prerogative. Regardless, the tactics work very well, and honestly, if you're concerned about it being a very complicated class, you're never going to have more than 5 tactics ever available to you during a certain day. And there are a lot of feat tactics that you can add to your list, your repertoire of tactics, but you don't really need to worry about that too much. You're only going to ever have to worry about 5 at most, and you're probably going to have like 2 to 3 favorites, maybe. So that being the case, it's not actually that complicated of a class, but it does have a pretty high skill ceiling. So the more proficient you are in Pathfinder, the more returns you're going to get from this class, and that's something I purely enjoy. So talking about its other features, they get access to shield block, which is really good. There's actually a shield line of commander feats, which I think is really fun. And as well, they get their class DC will also get to legendary. They actually get to legendary class proficiency at level 19. Now, this is something I actually really like, and having a class that has higher class proficiencies, which the only other class currently that does this is the Kineticist, is there's actually a lot of archetypes that use either spell DC or class DC, meaning the commander can get spell-like abilities at a legendary proficiency, granted at level 19, but even master at 15 is really not that bad. And unlike some other kind of mixed classes, they get their weapon proficiencies pretty much at the same rate that most classes do, getting up to master proficiency at level 13 with their weapons, and at level 17 they get armor mastery proficiency with all armors. So that being the case, it's really good. Now, another thing I really like about the class as well is the use of warfare lore and the fact that they can use warfare lore for their initiative. So at 3rd level, you get warfare expertise. This allows you to use warfare lore as essentially a monster recall knowledge lore. Now, they do have a little bit more specification, so it's not an omni lore like many other classes get, but you can use it to note a creature's offensive abilities, whatever their saving throw is the weakest, and if the creature can be reasoned with. So not everything can be done with warfare lore, but a fair amount can. And as long as you're observing an enemy during combat, you can use warfare lore as your initiative, which is, unless you have a class that gets legendary proficiency in perception, it is one of the few ways you can get access to a legendary initiative consistently. Now, rogues obviously could sneak eventually into every combat, but there are some ways around that, and it's not always going to be as consistent. You might not always have the case, but as long as you can see an enemy, warfare lore is going to be probably one of the best initiative skills that you're going to have access to, which means the commander has a very high chance of going first in combat. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I'm not so concerned about them not being a wisdom class, but if they made it wisdom, it would be the same all the way, and warfare lore probably just gets better than their perception anyway. So that being the case, it'd work out the same. But yeah, so overall base features, it's a pretty good martial class. It gets some unique features around the use of warfare lore, and it does get legendary proficiency in its class DC, which does open up a lot of options through certain archetypes. But let's go ahead and take a look at the tactics. Now, I'm going to go through each of these as quickly as I can. Don't want this video to be super long, and we still have the feats to go through. So, first up, we have the basic ones. Now, you get to select 4 of these at the beginning. Now, I don't know why they have this split up into mobility and offensive tactics, because there's no real reason for it other than I guess it just makes it more clear what they do. But when you get to the higher level proficiencies, like expert tactics, there's no mobility or offensive expert tactics. There's just expert tactics. Same thing with legendary tactics and master tactics. So, but let's go ahead and take a look at defensive retreat. Defensive retreat, it's 2 actions. All your squad mates can immediately step up to 3 times as a free action. Free action, not reaction. That's very important. Each step must take them further away from at least one hostile creature they're observing, and they can only move closer to a hostile creature if doing so is the only way for them to be moved towards safety, which is moving away from a creature typically that has reactive strike. I love defensive retreat. It's really good. It's 2 actions though, and this is one of the few ones that doesn't allow you to also partake in this. But there's many times I've seen groups run into an enemy that has reactive strike and then kind of get stuck, not wanting to move away, or a monster moves into a situation that's really bad for some squishies. So you can use defensive retreat, and because your squad mates can opt into a tactic, it's not mandatory that all your squad mates move, and if you have another 1 action tactic, you can then use your 3rd action in the round to command those allies to do whatever you want them to do. So I really like defensive retreat. It's a very solid one, and it's really good for getting your teammates out of a bad situation. Next up is form up, and this is a really good one. It's a singular action, and each squad mate, if they choose to do so, and as well, these are one of the few tactics, both this and defensive retreat, that don't require your allies to be within the range of your banner, which is actually super important. So All squad mates that can hear you or see you, they can choose to immediately stride as a reaction, though each must end their movement inside your banner's aura. So while this one doesn't require them to be in your aura, this one does mean that they do need to move at least within a 30-foot emanation of your character. So this is really good, and this is actually a potentially better one than Defensive Retreat. Defensive Retreat is really good against enemies with Reactive Strike. Form Up, one, uses a reaction, which Defensive Retreat doesn't, so that's something important to keep in mind, though you can excuse one of your teammates by giving them a bonus reaction. And this allows them to stride rather than step 3 times. So that being the case, Form Up is really good in a lot more situations, and there's a lot more flexibility around it, though Defensive Retreat, I think, is still the better defensive option, which is why it is a 2 action versus Form Up's 1 action. Regardless, Form Up is also really good. Then we have Mountaineer training and Naval training. I'm just going to combine both of these because they do the same thing. So essentially, as a singular action, you can signal to all your squad mates, and until the end of your next turn, you and each of your squad mates gain either a climb speed for mountain training or a swim speed for naval training, which is really cool. So for a singular action, you give everyone a movement option in some situations. This can be insanely useful, and Mountaineer training, I think more specifically, can be very, very helpful in a lot of ways. And this isn't an action that moves them or costs a reaction. So this doesn't give any bonus action efficiency, but you can consider this as, even if you're using it selfishly just for yourself, you can give yourself a 20-foot movement speed or climb speed as a singular action, which is actually really, really cool and very interesting. In addition, while you have this tactic prepared, you can use warfare lore in place of athletics for climbing or swimming checks if they come up. So even though you get the speeds that kind of negate the necessity for those checks, you might not have an action to do so, or your banner might not be available to use your commander actions. So that being the case, being able to use your warfare lore is pretty cool, and this just allows you to use your intelligence in place of your strength, meaning if you want to play a very dex-based commander, you're not going to be punished for the variety of mobility situations you might find yourself in. Either way, both of these trainings are insanely good. Next up is Passage of Lines, and honestly, it's not one of my favorite ones, but as a singular action, you can signal all your squad mates who are currently affected by your commander's banner. So this one does require the use of your banner to utilize, and each ally can choose to swap with another willing adjacent ally to them as a free action that does not trigger reactions. This is a really good way to get some allies out of some bad situations or to move characters into much more optimal situations. And because this is a free action, it doesn't take any of your team's reactions, and this doesn't trigger reactions as well. So this can be very useful. Now, your allies can't swap into places they can't possibly stand. And as well, if they're swapping with a large or larger ally, they can swap to any square that the character previously occupied, but they must maintain adjacency, as it's mentioned here up at the top. So that being the case, it's pretty good. Honestly, Defensive Retreat, I think, is generally better because your whole team can, I mean, granted, they can't move towards an enemy, so it's not good for positioning, but I feel like Defensive Retreat is generally better in most situations, but Passage of Lines can be useful. It's definitely one of those folios you pack away in some situations when maybe you're in very tight quarters or something. I'm honestly not so sure. Not one of my favorite ones for sure, but I can at least see the use for it to have in your back pocket when you need it. All right, moving on to offensive tactics, we have coordinating maneuvers. This is another very interesting one. As a singular action, you signal one squad mate who's currently in the range of your banner. They can immediately step as a free action, and if they end this movement next to an opponent, they can attempt to reposition that target as a reaction. So this singular action gives an ally both a free action and a reaction, and it allows them to attempt an immediate reposition. This is really good for moving enemies out of position with whatever their team is, And this is a very disruptive maneuver. It's really, really good. And if you have very strong teammates who can make the reposition checks really good, or allies who are very good at making reposition checks, like the Guardian, then this is an even stronger maneuver. Now, it is only a step, so there are some situations where this is not as good, but the step is better for just maneuvering an enemy specifically, as your ally can position themselves to move your enemy further away, essentially. So that being the case, I really like coordinated maneuvers. It's very strong and is a singular action with a 2 action, or at least a +1 action efficiency. It's very solid. Double team is a really good one. So you signal one squad mate affected by your banner, who is within reach of an opponent. The ally can shove or reposition an opponent as a free action. If their maneuver is successful and the target ends up moved adjacent to a different squad mate, you or the second squad mate can attempt a melee strike against the target as a reaction. Double team essentially allows your ally to use an action to position an enemy, typically into a flanked position, so that another ally or yourself can then melee strike that target as an action. This is actually really good because if you're doing this with yourself, it's essentially just a net neutral, because you're essentially using a action to make your ally use an action, and then you're using the second action essentially yourself to strike the enemy. So it's a pure neutral efficiency, which is really good. And because the ally can choose to shove or reposition the enemy, this means that the enemy can't be shoved away from them. With shoving, your ally can actually follow the enemy, and they can be pushed into another ally who does not need to be within your banner range to then do the flanking maneuver strike with. So, that being the case, this is pretty good. This is a very solid one, and I think that there's a lot of ways this one can be used, and it has the same kind of disruptive nature that the coordinating maneuvers had, just with an extra attack added on, having the extra action. Between the two, I'm not quite sure which I would use. I would say double team is really good more offensively than coordinating maneuvers, which is more action efficient. So I think there's good reasons to use both, honestly. But I probably wouldn't take both at the same time, if I'm being fair. Especially not when you're starting at level 1, when you only get 2 different tactics that you can use in a given time. So I wouldn't take them both at the same time, but having both available is not a bad thing either. Next up is Endit. Now, this is a 2-action incapacitation tactic, so be careful about trying to use this against enemies of higher level, but this is mostly used for culling weaker enemies. Now, if you or one of your allies, if you and your allies currently outnumber the enemies, or a squad mate reduce an enemy to 0 hit points since the start of your last turn, you can use this one as a requirement. When you do so, you signal all squad mates currently in your banner aura, and each ally can step directly towards a hostile creature that they're observing as a free action. Any hostile creature within 10 feet of you or a squad mate after this movement must make a will save against your class DC, which I will mention will eventually get to legendary. On failure, they become fleeing 1 for a round, and on a crit failure, they become fleeing 1 and frightened 2. Now, this is an emotion and fear effect, and also has the incapacitation trait. This is insanely good for trying to end fights a little bit earlier. It's a really good debuff, and if you have allies with a bunch of allies with reactive strike through feats, or just being, by grace of being a fighter, then Endit is really good for provoking enemies, forcing them to use actions that provoke attack of opportunity, which means Endit actually can have as much action efficiency as you have reactive strikes available on your team, which is insanely good and can be really, really effective. Not only that, but if they crit fail, they also become frightened too, reducing their AC, which is really good. And allies don't even need to end adjacent to the enemies. They just need to be within 10 feet. So this can be a mass fear, essentially, spell, only it doesn't require a spell slot. And it just requires that your teammates are within close proximity, or yourself, of an enemy, and of course you have to outnumber the current enemies. But that's honestly not too hard to do in most combat situations. So overall, I really like Endit. It's just not good against boss encounters, but it's good for clearing out the chaff. Pinter Attack. This one's actually really good, very good action, or like combat efficiency wise. So for a singular action, all squad mates affected by your banner each can step as a free action. If any of your allies end this movement adjacent to an opponent, that opponent is off guard to a melee attack from you and all other squad mates who responded to the Pinter Attack until the start of your next turn. Now it is all other squad mates, so you can use Pinter Attack to move an ally who's more efficient in combat to a position to give more efficiency to other allies, or to take an ally who's not as efficient in combat to give more opportunities for the more efficient combatants on your team. And because squad mates can opt into this, and only it's just whenever they're adjacent to an enemy, this pretty much can be used to give a single ally essentially a free action to step and get more or less a free feint on this enemy, making this actually super action efficient. And this is only until the start of your next turn. So this is a whole round where that enemy is off guard, and nothing here states that the enemy needs to maintain adjacency to the Pinter Attack ally or squad mate. So that being the case, this is a really good way to get a guaranteed off guard on an enemy. The only requirement meaning that an ally needs to be adjacent to an enemy is really good. And there's many situations where certain bosses or the like just are really hard to flank or can't be flanked normally. So that, this makes Pinter Attack a really good way to give an enemy essentially a guaranteed -2 to their AC, which is very solid. Next up, we have a Reload. This is a really good one. It's a singular action. You signal all allies who are currently affected by your banner, and all allies within that range can then interact as a reaction to reload a weapon. Now, this also has a special thing where if you're working a siege weapon with a siege crew, you can use this to load a siege weapon instead. Very, very fun. Reload's very good. If you have a bunch of characters using guns or crossbows or whatever, Reload's a very solid way to increase efficiency of reloading weapons, meaning that guns and crossbows actually become stronger than standard range weapons, typically while this is being used on the battlefield. So Reload, actually hidden OP. Next up, we got Shields Up. Many people are going to love this one. As a action, you can tell all your allies to raise their shield as a reaction. This is very solid, and it gives an additional benefit. Squad mates who are wielding a parry weapon can instead position that weapon defensively as a free action. So if you have a parry ally, they don't even need to spend their reaction, which is really good. And if you have an ally, a singular ally who's a shield user, you can raise their shield for them, essentially, and they still get to keep their... And because you can give them that reaction, they still get to keep their reaction for shield blocking, meaning this is a really good defensive use if you have teammates who are using shields or parry weapons. Strike Hard is insanely good because it's 2 actions. You choose a squad mate who can see and hear you, so they don't need to be within your commander banner aura. So this is really good for range characters as well. And that ally can immediately attempt a strike as a reaction. So you can force an ally to strike as a reaction, and because of drilled reactions, this is a free reaction. So Strike Hard can essentially give your fighter 2 reactive strikes around at their full attack with no penalty to their due to multi-attack. That's really, really strong. Now, it is a little action inefficient, but this can really utilize your fighter's strengths, which is just their high attack ability, much more keenly. Overall, really, really good. I think this is a very solid one, and I really have nothing to say other than this is just really good. Next up are Expert Tactics. You get this at level 7. This gives you an additional one you can use per day, and you can pick from, either the new expert ones or from any of the prior ones you didn't already know. Piranha Assault is very interesting. As a singular action, you can designate a creature within 60 feet and signal all squad mates who are currently affected by your banner. Each time you or your squad mates, so it's you or your squad mates, attacks the creatures and deals damage, if that creature using a type of damage that creature resists, you ignore an amount of damage of the creature's resistance equal to your level until the beginning of your next turn. there's not many creatures that have like more than 10 resistance. So being able to knock off 7 resistance minimum when you first get access to Piranha's Assault is insanely good. And this allows your team to be effective against most types of enemies without ever having to worry about any of their resistances. This one does say specifically anytime you or your squad mates attack the creature and deal damage. I don't know if that means it needs the attack trait or if this can work with spells, but this is also a really good way to allow spellcasters who very typically get resisted to some of their damages actually be able to bypass some of that. So I'm not quite sure, but regardless, this one doesn't expend any of your team's reactions. And it doesn't give any free actions. So it's not super action efficient, but I will say that this is, until the beginning of your next turn, it's very damage efficient, which I think is very much worth the action use. It's just very situational how often, because there's not many enemies that are resistant to physical damage types, but you never know. And there's honestly a lot of enemies that are resistant to precision damage. And this is a really good way to ensure that your rogue sneak attack actually gets to go off, or your swashbuckler's panache. So overall, Piranha Assault is very good, especially in teams that use precision damage. Stupefying Raid is another fun one, and this is essentially the Mage Bum Rush. So you signal up to 2 squad mates that are currently within your commander's banner. These allies can stride up to their speed as a reaction, and each enemy they're adjacent to at any point during the movement must make a will save against your class DC, which is expert at this point, or become stupefied 1 for 1 round, or stupefied 2 on a crit failure. This is an emotion, fear, and mental effect. But yeah, so this essentially makes spellcasters have a much harder time, and it works on most spellcasters. So that being the case, Stupefying Raid is really good, but it's very much an anti-mage specific tactic. Next up, we have the Master Tactics. This one you pick up at level 13, I want to say. 15, level 15, you get Master Tactician. So this will give you a 4th folio you can use in a day, and either a master tactic or, prior level. Demoralizing Charge is 2 actions. You signal up to 2 squad mates currently affected by your banner. They can immediately stride towards an enemy they're observing as a free action, so they can move as a free action. And if they end this movement adjacent to an enemy, they can attempt a strike at the enemy as a reaction. So for 2 actions, you can give 2 allies a free action and a reaction, and one of those allies gets a free reaction out of this. So, you can give the fighter the free action and then the barbarian just the reaction if they don't have reactive strike at this point, which means this has a +2 action efficiency, which is really, really good. And of each of these strikes for each strike that are successful, the enemy must make a will save against your class DC or become frightened 1 or frightened 2 on a crit failure. If both strikes if both allies strike the same target, that enemy takes a -1 circumstance penalty to their will save to resist this effect. They don't make 2 saves, but they make the save harder. It's -2 if either of the strikes were a critical hit. So this is really good. This is a +2 action efficiency, can move allies. And, there's actually kind of a hidden feature as well, is you can just move 2 allies without spending any reactions for just 2 actions. So if they don't end up adjacent to an enemy, which they don't have to move towards an enemy, it's a 2 actions that you can give to 2 of your allies, making it net neutral for your team and really good for positioning allies. But obviously, putting them next to an enemy is even better, because at the very least, if even one of them does, they just get a free reaction out of it and just increases the action efficiency that much more, and can make an enemy frightened, which, you still have another action on your team to potentially strike the enemy. So this is a really good come help me kind of tactic as well. So I really, really like Demoralizing Charge. Ready, Aim, Fire. This one was another one that was shown a little early by Michael Sayer. So definitely follow Michael Sayer on Twitter. This is 2 actions, and it has so much action efficiency because essentially you can signal all your squad mates who are currently affected by your commander banner, and they can each interact to swap a range weapon that they have, and free action reload that weapon, and then free action. So it's a free action swap, a free action reload, and then they can attempt to strike an enemy that both you and they can see as a reaction. So for as many teammates as you have, this has a potential 3 action boost. So even if one ally does this, it's actually a 1 action efficiency. So every ally past the first is 3 action bonus efficiency for your team. This is really good, and it has a special feature here of where if one of your allies knows a cantrip or has one prepared with a range of 30 feet or more, so it can't be less than 30 feet, they can cast it as a reaction at an enemy that you're both observing instead of the other actions that this one gives. So this works with most spellcasters as well. Many keen people did notice, though, that this does not work with the Kineticist's Blast, which is very strange. And I assume most GMs would just allow at least the 1 action blast version. If not the 2 action one, I don't really see much of a problem with that. I don't know if it just would have been too wordy or whatever, or there was some kind of intent behind it. But I will say this doesn't really only hurt Kineticist. This is not a good tactic for any allies who are just not good with ranged weapons in general. So that being the case, I'm not really too pressed about it. I think it's a really good tactic, and it works really well with spellcasters on your team. So there's many people that you can give the benefit of. And again, one of them will get a free reaction out of this one. So that being the case, it's nothing but net. Even if Kinesis gets a little bit left in the dust on this one, I mean, like, your champion and your barbarian probably aren't using ranged weapons all too much either, if I'm being honest. So that being the case, I think Radiant Fire is just really good, and people just need to not sweat the small stuff. All right, and then finally, level 19, we get Legendary Tactics. This will allow you to have a 5th tactic available every day, and you can pick up one of these two or one of the prior tactics as well. And they're both really good. So first is Executioner's Volley. It's 2 actions, and you can use it once every 10 minutes. You signal each of your squad mates who are currently affected by your banner to make a range strike as a reaction against a single target you designate. You combine all damage from the attacks for the purpose of resistance and weaknesses. If the designated target is a living creature, these attacks gain the death effect and the death trait. If the target dies as a result of this tactic, all other enemies within the affected area of the commander's banner must make a will save against your class DC or become frightened too. So this is really good. This is screw this guy in specifically. Everyone shoots this one. This is really good for actually taking out like singular mobs because like chaff. You want to do this on lower level enemies because they're more likely to die, and this can instantly make every other enemy just have to make a check against the frightened condition. Now, I don't like the frightened condition in the fact that this one requires essentially that your squad mates are typically within 30 range of you and typically of enemies as well, because the enemies who are frightened must be within your banner effect as well. So there's kind of some clashing there. But even just the ability to command all your ranged allies to target a single enemy and combine all that damage for the purpose of getting through their resistances is really good. And in the few situations you're currently dealing with some other enemies in your banner aura, I mean, this is a very solid way to just nerf a lot of enemies at the same time with just 2 actions. So this one has a really decent action efficiency if it's simultaneously frightening enemies. Otherwise, it loses some action efficiency if you are, 1, not using a ranged weapon yourself, and 2, not having at least 2 people shooting with this particular action. And I might mention as well, when you do a thing as well, you also spend your reactions. So you keep that in mind. But this one's really good. And this is another one of those tactics I mentioned before where you and your squad mates get to make the attack. So this allows you to attack with allies with a ranged weapon if you have them already equipped. So something to keep in mind if you like the idea of a ranged commander. And we have Valkyries Charge. This is a massive one. 3 actions, but it's really, really good. The only 3 action tactic up to this point. You can only use this one once per day. But when you use it, you restore 80 hit points to yourself and each squad mate currently affected by your banner. This effect has the healing trait. If an affected ally was unconscious due to their hit points being reduced to 0, they pop back up onto their feet. They can stand and pick up any dropped weapons, and I'm assuming shields too, all part of this reaction, then, or sorry, action. It doesn't state. They can immediately stand up. That should say as a free action. Then each affected ally can stride up to twice their speed directly towards an enemy that they're observing. If they end their movement adjacent to an enemy within, or an enemy is within their reach, they can attempt a strike that against that enemy as a reaction. You and your squad mates can use Valkyries Charge while burrowing, flying, or climbing or swimming instead of striding if you have the corresponding movement type. This is really good. So for 3 actions, you get 80 hit points. Everyone in your banner who's an ally gets, or your squad mates get 80 hit points. You can bring people who are currently unconscious back up and let them grab all their weapons, which does so much action efficiency. They can then stride twice and then strike an enemy. I don't have to tell you guys how action efficient this one tactic is. Now, you can only use this once per day, but this is literally a fight-changing tactic. This can completely change the course of a battle and is insanely powerful. Valkyries Charge is probably a must take because I can only see benefits when using it. But yeah, so that's all the tactics. Let's go ahead and get through the feats. I know this video is a little bit long, but that's just because Commander has so much other bonus stuff. We'll get to more stuff when we get to the Guardian tomorrow. But let's go ahead and take a look at the feats. So first up, we have Armored Regiment Training. You treat all heavy armor you're wearing as 1 bulk lighter, so this is really good if you don't have that much strength, but you still want to wear a bunch of armor. You still need to make the armor's strength check, but at the very least, you're not overly. You can still carry some stuff. Your bulk limit is not being overly taken up, which is really nice, honestly. And you can rest normally while wearing your armor. This is actually one of the earliest ways you can wear armor in your sleep, which is, if any of you have games where your GM tends to attack you when you're in bed, that's a very frustrating thing because a lot of times you're fighting without your armor. So this allows you to just ignore that and don't have to worry about those midnight camp ambushes, which is very nice. In addition, in exploration mode, you and your allies use your normal speeds without including your armor speed penalties to determine your travel speed. This is really good if you're playing in campaigns like Kingmaker that uses a lot of travel time stuff. So that being the case, Armored Regiment Training is insanely good and very solid if you're planning on taking heavy armor as a commander. Combat assessment actually is just the same as the fighter one. You strike an enemy, and if you hit, you get to make a recall knowledge on the check, and it's +2 circumstance bonus if you crit the enemy. The target then becomes immune for a day. Not really much to say other than it's just combat assessment from fighter. Combat medic. I did mention this one earlier, so there is a medic line of feats. Now, the requirements is you can prepare at least 2 tactics. That means combat medic is not going to be good necessarily right away for multi-class archetyping. So this is mostly really good for just a standard commander. But when you use it, you are trained in medicine and you can use your intelligence modifier in place of your wisdom modifier for medicine checks. So again, another reason why the wisdom thing is not a big deal, though if they just change it to a wisdom class and they don't even need to make mention of that. And you get to use you gain access to the battle medicine feat. That's really all it does, is it just allows you to make the most out of using battle medicine by using your intelligence rather than wisdom. Really good. But if they change this to a wisdom class, then they might give this something else. I don't really think they're going to, in all honesty. I think they're going to keep it as an intelligence-based class. So combat medic is just really good because it just allows you to use intelligence rather than wisdom. Oh, it also makes you trained in medicine, so an extra trained proficiency at level 1 if you so choose. Commander Steed, I love this one. You get a animal companion, typically a steed such as a horse. That's it. You can also attach I shouldn't say that's it. You can also attach your commander's banner to your saddle or barding, allowing all your banner effects to take place in your steed or animal companion space rather than your own. Can be really useful in a lot of situations. I really like this one, and of course we'll see the other animal companion feats as well as we go through the feats. Deceptive Tactics. This is another one that's best for commanders, not multi-class archetyping, as you need to have be able to prepare at least 2 tactics. So now whenever you're attempting to create a diversion or feint, you can use warfare lore rather than deception, which is really good. It means that you don't need to multi-invest in charisma if you want to do feinting during combat, which is honestly a very solid thing in my opinion. And it also treats your proficiency in warfare lore as your current proficiency rank in deception for the purpose of picking up prerequisites for feats and other types of things, like such as lengthy diversion for creative diversion. You also gain lengthy diversion feat as an additional feat. So deceptive tactics like combat medic just opens up options for your character, allowing you to utilize your intelligence rather than whatever their native attributes are, and they give you an additional feat as well. So that being the case, very, very solid. Plant Banner, a very fun one, very interesting indeed. So what this one does is essentially you plant your banner and it creates a 30-foot burst, which is actually 10 feet large. It's very weird. All eyes within a 30-foot burst immediate. Oh, I'm sorry. So what happens is you plant your banner. All allies who are currently within a 30-foot burst of your planted banner gain temp HP equal to half your intelligence modifier. So standardly 2 when you pick this up at level 1. These hit points last for a round. Each time an ally starts their turn within the burst, though, these hit points are renewed for another round. While your banner is planted, you can signal your tactics or abilities only with auditory signals instead of just visual. And if your banner is attached to your weapon, you cannot wield the weapon as that weapon is currently planted in the ground. Pretty simple. In addition, the burst for your effects is 10 feet larger. So it goes from 30-foot emanation to a 40-foot burst, which is pretty cool. So when you plant it, you actually get a bigger range that you can leave behind to do other things. And you can also use this same action to retrieve your weapon, as long as you're adjacent to it. Though any enemy adjacent to the square you planted your banner can also remove it as an action as well. And then all your banner effects go away until you retrieve it. So something to keep in mind. Now, this actually does get much stronger at 5th level, as the temp HP increases to a value equal to your intelligence modifier, which is 2 more higher. So 4 temp HP every round, pretty good. And at 15th level, they're equal to your level plus your intelligence modifier, which means typically at level 15, you're going to have a 20 temp HP generating banner aura, which is really cool. So overall, Plant Banner is really, really cool. It is a little bit of a more difficult feat to make use of because you create a zone you need to maintain rather than having it move with you. But I do think a lot of the benefits outweigh the risks. All right, starting at 2nd level, we have Adaptive Strategy. Honestly, a must-take in my opinion. So when you roll Initiative as a free action, you can replace one of your prepared tactics with another tactic in your folio. This means that you always will have access to the most efficient tactic for any combat scenario. Really, really good if you are someone who really likes to plan. Honestly, this is probably a must-take for me most of the time, but there might be situations where you just have very particular tactics you like using. So adaptive stratagem is not going to be necessarily for everyone, but it's honestly a must take for me. Defensive swap. This one is a reaction and is triggered when an adjacent willing ally, when you or an adjacent willing ally are the target of an attack roll. Also, you need to have an ally who's adjacent to you to make use of this anyway. You swap places for the purpose of taking the attack. It doesn't matter. You can take an attack for your ally, or your ally can take an attack for you as a reaction. Defensive swap is really good for the full heavy armor commander who wants to defend their squishy backliner, or for the more agile dex commander who wants to swap with a frontliner for taking damage up on the front line. Either way, really, really cool. I really like this one. It helps you spread damage more easily across the battlefield. Guiding Shot. This is definitely a power play feat. A lot of players are going to try to use this one to get the most efficiency out of it, because what happens is, now this is predominantly if you're using a ranged weapon. So for a ranged commander style build, you attempt to strike with the required weapon or ranged weapon. If the strike hits the next creature other than you to attack the same creature before the start of your next turn, gains a +1 circumstance bonus to their attack roll, or +2 if your strike was a crit. So essentially, you strike an enemy, and they get or your next ally to attack them will get a +1 circumstance bonus to their attack roll. Really good for making your fighter hit even harder on the battlefield, or your Barbarian potentially. Now, this is a flourish, so you can't use this more than once in a round, sadly, but it's really cool, and it's a really good follow-up for then a maneuver to move your allies to strike the enemy, like Demoralizing Charge. So Guiding Shot is really good for the range commander style of play. Next up is Setup Strike. As a singular action, you make a melee strike against an enemy. If the strike is a success, the target is then off guard against the next attack that one of your allies attempts against it before the start of your next turn. This is really good for rogues. You do this, you strike the enemy is now considered off guard and thus sneak attackable. This one does not have the flourish trait though, so you could do this against several enemies, and the first time that enemy is struck, they are going to be considered off guard. So really good way to split up your attacks against some of the chaff to make the enemies much easier to deal with. Or again, another good one where you strike the enemy, Demoralizing Charge, rogue runs up, stabs them in the back, gets a bunch of sneak attack damage. So yeah, really good feats, honestly, both Guiding Shot and Setup Strike. Next up is Tactical Expansion. This one is a very good one to keep on your mind because whenever you select it, you can add 2 additional tactics that you qualify for. And there's a special where you can pick this one up multiple times. So if you are at a level where you're getting access to like expert or master tactics, but you want to pick up another earlier tactic, then why not, that plus a bonus one. So really good. It is a feat expenditure to pick up extra tactics, but depending on your style of play and preference for play, especially if you are also picking up adaptive stratagem, a lot of low-level feats can add up together to be very powerful. So it's something that I think is really good. Speaking of, we also have Rapid Assessment. As a free action when you roll initiative, you can attempt a recall knowledge check against one creature you're currently observing. Really, really good. If you're not using adaptive stratagem, there's no reason not to take Rapid Assessment other than you just don't have the feat slot available, as it just makes your beginning turn very, very action efficient. So either way, these both work out really, really well, especially if you like going recall knowledge builds, which I know a lot of you do. All right, at 4th level, we have Banner Twirl. Now, this one is a tactic, and whenever you select tactics that are feats, they just get added to your folio, so you don't need to worry about whatever your max level is. This one will always be a bonus one, essentially. So for a singular action, you spin your banner, and you and an adjacent ally currently benefit from concealment from range attacks until the start of your next turn. Banner Twirl is really good in situations where you're dealing with a lot of range enemies. Very specific, but this is where adaptive stratagem comes into play, where you can have this one available for whenever you need it, and then use adaptive stratagem when you're in a fight with a lot of range enemies. So overall, really good, and honestly, concealment is pretty strong. We have Observational Analysis. This is actually an improvement for combat assessment, and if you're a fighter who likes combat assessment, you could actually pick this one up through multi-class archetyping, granted at level 8. So when you use combat assessment and you strike the target, you get the +2 circumstance bonus to the recall knowledge check. All right, so Observational Analysis is an improvement to combat assessment and one you can pick up as a fighter if you like combat assessment, only at level 8 through multi-class archetyping. So when you use combat assessment against a target that you or an ally has targeted with a strike or a spell since the start of your last turn, you get that +2 circumstance bonus to recall knowledge checks, or it becomes a +4 if the strike is a crit, which is really good and a very easy way to just get a much better recall knowledge check on an enemy. And since we're using warfare lore anyway, this is a very solid way. Our warfare lore should be expert at this point, I think. So regardless, you're going to be really good at combat assessing enemies, and there's no action change. So you're still using combat assessment. It's just when you're doing so in addition to following up an ally's attack, you just get a better benefit, which is a great feat in my opinion. Shield of Recovery, one I really like because it stacks on with the Combat Medic line, and this allows you to, when you use Battle Medicine or treat wounds, you're considered to have a hand free when using medicine as long as the only thing that hand is holding is a shield. And when you use Battle Medicine on an ally while wielding a shield, they gain a +1 circumstance bonus to their AC and reflex saves until the start of your next turn, or until they're no longer adjacent to you, whichever comes first. I love this. This makes the idea of a commander battle medic really, really good. And when you're using a shield, you can give AC bonuses to your ally as a bonus to battle medicine them, which battle medicine's also just really, really good. Shielded recovery is very solid and very fun if you want to go the medic commander route. Next up is Unsteadying Strike, a singular action. Now, this one does have the flourish tag, so you can only use this once per round, but you make a melee strike against an enemy within reach. If the strike is successful, the enemy takes a -2 circumstance penalty to their fort DC to resist being grappled, repositioned, or shoved, and a -2 circumstance penalty to their reflex DC to resist being disarmed. Both penalties last until the start of your next turn. This one just makes it very easy for you to affect enemies with certain maneuvers. I'm sad the Unsteadying Strike does not make it easier to trip an enemy. That would have been really good, honestly. And I don't see why they really removed it other than the fact that trips are just insanely good anyway. So yeah, it's pretty good. It's very specific to a certain team play style, but considering it takes up a flourish slot, I don't know if I'd select this feat personally. But in niche situations, I'm sure certain teams would love Unsteadying Strike. Wave the Flag. Now, this one also has the flourish trait, but this one is a little bit better, in my opinion. As a singular action, each ally currently benefiting from your commander's banner reduces their frightened condition by 1 and can immediately attempt a new save against any one mental effect currently affecting them. Regardless of the result, any ally that attempts this save is temporarily immune to Wave the Flag for 10 minutes. So this is a really good way to drop a bunch of allies' fear by 1. Not as good as the champion version that just makes it where whenever the champion loses it, all their allies within their aura loses it. But you can do this, and it can make allies get around things like confuse or other really nasty mental effects by making them make another save. So Wave the Flag, I think, is really good. Even though it does have the flourish trait, I think that's necessary because it's a very powerful feat. Next up, we have level 6. We have Battle-Tested Warhorse. This is essentially the mature animal companion feat, though, in addition, your mount never attacks you, even if magically compelled to do so. So your animal companion is just more loyal than most animal companions, which I think is really cool. Efficient Preparation. This is a really good one. This allows you to use an additional tactic per day. So increasing the number of your daily tactics by 1. Very solid if you have a lot of tactics that you like to use. Reactive Strike. Reactive Strike. You just get Reactive Strike. It's a pretty standard martial affair. Not really too much more to say about this one. Shield Warden. You need shield block, which if you're a commander, you already have. Now, when you have a shield raise, you can use shield block against attacks or against an attack made against an ally who is adjacent to you. If you do so, the shield prevents the ally from taking damage instead of preventing blah, blah, blah. This is the same one that you get through the Bastion archetype dedication as well. So very good, and it makes the shield commander more interesting, which I really like. Next up, we have Defiant Banner. This is a very interesting one. It's a single action banner effect, but not a tactic. So you don't have to worry about this one taking up any of your tactic slots. You and allies affected by your commander's banner, when you use this action, gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage equal to your intelligence modifier until the start of your next turn. At 14th level, the value of this resistance increases to your intelligence modifier plus half your level. So at level 8, you'll get 4 resistance to most weapon and physical types of damage, which is insanely good until the start of your next turn. And at 14th level, and at level 10, it would actually go up by 1 if you're just improving your intelligence. And at level 14, it would be it would be 13, or no, 12. It would be 12, and at level 15, it'd probably be bumped up to no, it would still be 12. So at level 14, it'd be 12 resistance, which is actually pretty insane at level 14, to be honest. So yeah, Defiant Banner, single action, just team resistance in your commander aura. Very, very cool. All right, we're at Officer's Education. If you've seen the short, you know how I feel about this one. It's actually my favorite commander feat. It's insane. So you become trained in 2 skills you're not already trained in. You become an expert in a skill that you are already trained in. You learn a common language, and you gain a general feat of 3rd level or lower that you meet the prerequisites for. And you can take this feat twice, gaining this benefit each time. So yeah, that's insane. A singular feat that gives you 3 skill proficiencies and a general feats and a language is really good, and you can take this one twice. If you want to have a character who's really good more in like the roleplay sense or can do a lot more things than just martial combat stuff, Officer's Education becomes a must take as it makes your character so much more diverse and capable of doing a lot more things. And because you can take it twice, I mean, your skill proficiencies are going to be so high. So I absolutely love Officer's Education. Rallying Banner. This is actually a healing effect, which I really love. Now, you can only use this once per 10 minutes, but it's only a singular action. When you use this, you roll 4d6 and you restore that many hit points to each ally currently affected by your commander's banner. This healing increases by an additional d6 at every even level after this one. So pretty much every even level, you're going to get an additional d6. Now, the effect does draw upon your allies' morale and adrenaline, and it cannot be used outside of combat. So this is not a infinite out of combat healing ability, which I think is fair. But even in combat, 4d6 when you pick this up is really, really good for a singular action. It's a singular action. So many classes would need to spend like 2 action spell slots to get something similar to this one. And it just automatically improves as you level up. Rallying Banner is honestly very good. All right, then we have Unrivaled Analysis. You need Rapid Assessment, which you would have picked up earlier. So whenever you use Rapid Assessment, which is that one that's a free action when you roll initiative, you can attempt 4 recall knowledge checks rather on any creatures you're observing rather than just 1, which is really, really good. All right, we're at to the level 10 stuff here. I know this video has been running a while, but I do want to call out before we do so. I'm going to be covering all things Pathfinder, Paizo, Starfinder 2e, tabletop stuff. So I recommend subscribing. If you want tabletop content, this is the channel to be on. Or at the very least, do me a favor and at least like the video so other people get to see this kind of content, as I know more and more people are going to be getting invested in Pathfinder 2e in the months to come, especially with probably the upcoming train wreck of D&D 2024. So that being the case, why don't we just make tabletop more of a thing for more people? But, all right, we're on to level 10. Battle Hardened Destrier. This is the next animal companion one. This, I forget what it's normally called. It doesn't really matter. But essentially, you get the next level above mature for your animal companion. It's the Nimble or Savage one. This one does not do anything different, though, than the standard animal companion feats do at level 10. So there's really not much more to say about it. It doesn't do anything special. It's just your animal companion becomes better, typically a steed. We have Drilled Reflexes. This requires the Drilled Reactions feature, which means this is only going to be for pure commanders, not for multi-class archetype commanders. Now, this allows you to give an extra reaction to up to 2 allies instead of 1. This just increases overall your team's efficiency. Not one necessarily I worry about taking unless you have a lot of allies who have special reactions they would like to use. So this one is not necessarily a must pick, but it can be really good, especially in certain team pickups. So it's definitely one you should always keep in mind for getting to level 10. We have another reaction here at level 10 with the Standard Bearer's Sacrifice. Now the trigger is an opponent targets an ally with a ranged attack, and you're observing both of them, and you're also in range of the attack. Now what I find funny about this one is this is an actual true taunt, which the Guardian really doesn't have. Now, you must be wielding or holding your banner, so you can't use Plant the Banner with this one in particular. But essentially, you start waving your banner around to draw the enemy's fire. The enemy will need to make a will save against your class DC, which at this point, I think is still expert. But nonetheless, if they succeed, they just target your ally in normal. But if they fail, they target you with the triggering attack instead, which is really cool. And if they crit fail for whatever reason, you actually get a +2 circumstance bonus to your AC against the triggering attack. So that being the case, it's a true taunt reaction, which is really, really cool and can be very helpful in a lot of situations. Next up, we have Targeting Strike, which is the next step from the Guiding Shot line of feats. So essentially, whenever you hit with a ranged weapon using Guiding Shot, the next attack made by an ally against the target is made with a +2 circumstance bonus, even if the strike wasn't a critical, and the strike deals an amount of additional precision damage equal to your intelligence modifier. So this just makes Guiding Shot better. They always get the +2 circumstance bonus to the hit, And now your shot just does more damage equal to your intelligence modifier, allowing you to again add your intelligence to your combat effectiveness, which is really good. So overall, I really love this one, and I love the more proactive type of support stuff. You're making an attack that you would probably just make anyway, but you're making that enemy more vulnerable to your allies, and now you get to do more damage doing it. So I really, really do like this feat. Fortunate Blow. If you're good at math, this one's going to tickle your fancy. You have to strike the creature, and if it hits the next creature other than you to attack the same target before the start of your next turn, rolls their dice twice and takes the highest result. This is a fortune effect. This is essentially a advantage strike on an enemy that you successfully have hit. Now, it does have the flourish, so you do need to be careful. If you miss, it does kind of feel bad. But overall, Fortunate Blow is just really good if you're not using any of the other flourishes. Perfected Evaluations is next. This is a increase from Unrivaled Analysis. When you use Rapid Assessment, you can attempt a recall knowledge against 6 creatures that you're currently observing. So this is all from that line of free action beginning of the combat. Now you get 6 rather than 4 if you took the prior feat. Pretty good if this is the route you're trying to take. Reactive Interference, another reaction. I love a class that has a bunch of reactions available. An adjacent enemy begins to use a reaction. So when you notice this, if the triggering creature's level is equal to or lower than yours, you just disrupt the triggering reaction without the need to make a check. If the target creature's level is higher than yours, though, you need to make a attack roll against its AC. Now, this is not a strike. You're not dealing damage to the creature. The attack roll is just for the purpose of determining the level of success of the reaction. On a success, you disrupt the reaction. So really good. I absolutely love Reactive Interference. This is really good to stop enemies who do have Reactive Strike from using them against your allies when you're in combat. So really good. There's a lot of ways we can already kind of deal with this, so this one might not be necessary. But if you didn't select any of those ways and your level 12 is open, it might not be a bad one. And it really does have the kind of it goes very well in line with the frontline heavy armor commander's playstyle. At level 14, we have Contact with the Enemy. It goes off that old adage that the best laid plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. And this, you do need Adaptive Stratagem, which is that free action change in a stratagem. When you use Adaptive Stratagem, you can replace any number of your prepared tactics you have in your other folio. This one is only necessary if you have a bunch of tactics by selecting feats that give you other tactics or by selecting tactic-based feats. So I wouldn't worry about this one. Adaptive Stratagem should be enough in most situations. But if you are just taking every tactic possible, being the utmost commandery commander, then this one is going to be the one for you. So that's going to be Contact with the Enemy. Very solid level 14 feat. At level 14 feat, we are going further down the medic line. Now, as long as you're a master in medicine and you have the combat medic feat, for 3 actions, you can attempt a DC 40 medicine check to revive a dead creature that's been dead for no more than 3 rounds. If you succeed, the target returns to life with the effects of Raise Dead, except that it still has the wounded condition it had before it dying, increasing it by 1. Whether you succeed or fail, the target is temporarily immune to desperate resuscitation for a day. And you only increase the wounded condition, I should say, if the wounded condition wasn't what caused it to die in the first place. So yeah, just straight up a resurrection in a martial class is really good, and again makes the whole martial medic commander very, very plausible for a playstyle choice. I absolutely love this feat. Quickening Banner, single action, and this is a really good one. Once per 10 minutes, you just wave your flag, and each ally affected by your commander's banner is quickened. They can use that extra action to stride or strike. This is just a much more action-efficient haste, though it only lasts for 1 round, but it's free and it doesn't cost you a spell slot or anything like that. So honestly, Quickening Banner is really good, a very good battle starter, and honestly, any turn you use this is just a huge amount of action efficiency. So yeah, just great. Just a good feat. At 16th level, we have Confusing Commands. I love all these feats that are based on prior feats. It really makes skill feat lines very clear and obvious to the players. Now, this is the one that let you use Warfare Lore for things like Creative Diversion or Fainting an enemy. So for 2 actions, now this one does have the linguistic trait, so that's something important to keep in mention. Each enemy within the area affected by your commander's banner must make a will save against your class DC, or become confused for 1 round or 2 rounds on a crit failure. Targets who succeed at their saving throw are then immune to confusing commands for a day, but that's only when they succeed the saving throw. Technically, you can confuse enemies round after round by spending 2 actions as long as they're not succeeding the saves. This is really good, and there's some potential. You could take out an entire group of enemies by just consistently confusing them every round. I absolutely love confusing commands. Undaunted Discipline reaction. When your turn ends and you're currently affected by a mental effect, you can use this reaction to, until the start of your next turn, ignore a single mental effect you're currently going through. You can suppress a particular effect using Undaunted Discipline only once. You can't use Undaunted Discipline to suppress an effect you choose to have affected on yourself. You can use this reaction even if the mental effect is preventing you from using reactions, which is really cool. So if you want, one time you can stop yourself from being confused, dominated, or the like, which is really good, but you can only do this on 1 effect at a time and only once per effect. Regardless, very solid, and at late game, this becomes a lot more common, so this actually is really not a bad feat to pick up. Level 18, Demand Surrender. This is the only mechanical way to force enemies to surrender. This has similar requirements as that one tactic that we talked about earlier. I don't remember its name at this time, but it's either when you and your allies currently outnumber the enemies on the battlefield, or you and an ally has restrained or an opponent or reduced an opponent to 0 hit points since the start of your turn. You use your 2 actions, and confident in your victory, you command your opponents to surrender. Choose 1 opponent you're observing. You command that opponent to surrender in a strong voice. They must make a will save against your class DC, which at this level is just 1 level away from being legendary proficiency. So currently master. If they crit succeed, nothing happens, but if they succeed, the target can't take any hostile actions against you as or that can't include you as a target for 1 round. If they fail, they are fleeing 1 for a round, and if they crit fail, the creature drops any weapons they have, they lie prone on the ground, and they do not take any hostile actions against you or your allies for 1 minute or until you or one of your allies attacks them. So yeah, we actually have a full-on surrender mechanic implemented into the game. It's very late game, not very common to happen, and this one does have the incapacitation trait, so you're probably not going to be making the boss enemies surrender anytime soon, but this is a good way to at least get a particularly annoying enemy in a battlefield just out of the way. And yeah, overall, I really do like this one. I don't know if I would personally select it, but I do see its uses. Level 18, we have Practice Reflexes. You need drilled reflexes. This allows you to allow 4 allies to have extra reactions every time you do it. This essentially gives all your stuff perfect reaction efficiency, where any of your tactics that your allies use will not cost them any of their reactions, which is very solid. At level 20, we have Glorious Banner. Your commander's banner is now a 60-foot emanation rather than an 80-foot emanation, or rather than a 30-foot one, or 80 if you have the Plant the Banner one, which is really good and pretty much makes your banner cover the entire battlefield. But that's not all. In addition to this effect, the status bonuses to will saves against fear effects granted to your allies increases to +2, and you and your allies are granted a +1 standard status bonus to AC, fortitude saves, and reflex saves in general. So it's weird that it doesn't just apply to normal will saves. Oh, it says bonus to will saves and DCs against fear. Okay, so it is actually will. So will saves go up by 2, all other saves go up by 1, and your allies get a +1 AC when they're pretty much just on the battlefield with you, which is insanely good. Enemies that are within the affected area take a -2 status penalty to will saves as long as they can see your banner. That part is broken. Endgame psychic characters or any occult casters, any caster really who's going to be using any kind of fear effects or any kind of mental effects are going to be able to absolutely destroy any enemy within a 60-foot emanation. You stand in the middle of the battlefield, most battlefields, you'll be able to cover almost the entire map. That's insanely good. So Glorious Banner is very solid. And the final feat in this long video, which I apologize for, but it's just there's a lot going on in this class, is Pennant of Victory. Once per 10 minutes as a singular action, you can just give you and your allies a mega buff. You and your allies, remember, you and your allies are given a +4 status bonus to attack and damage rolls, a +10 status bonus to all your speeds, and +40 temporary hit points. This benefit lasts until the start of your next turn. That's a big round buff. A +4 status bonus is so unheard of in the game. So few things do this. This is we're ending this fight now command. And you can do this pretty much every combat as it's once per 10 minutes. This is a great way to turn the tides, but overall, this is just insane. You say, fighter, kill that man, and the fighter will go and absolutely crit the ever-living heck out of that enemy. So yeah, this is an insanely powerful victory as well, meaning level 20 is a very hard one to pick. It's either more support or more offensive, whatever your choice is. Regardless, that's going to be it for the commander. I know this is a bit of a long video. Thanks to those who wanted to see everything stick through. I'm no longer sick, so the audio should be much better. And of course, I was able to gather my thoughts a lot better for this particular video. So hopefully you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. It really helps the channel out a lot. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And good luck on your battlefield, soldiers. Bye.